Romantics, at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, are heavily influenced actually by empiricist philosophy. And they stress individuality and inspiration as the poet's key qualities. Right, so originality is a much bigger thing for a romantic than for a neoclassicist. There's some, now, in high school you may have learned that romantics are always nattering on about nature, right? And that the primary subject of romanticism is the natural world. That's not really the case. What romantics are really more interested in is the individual mind and the way it processes information. It just so happens that they usually use the natural world as a catalyst for thought, for meditation. Right? The meditation in the middle of a romantic poem is usually the most important part. So yeah, country life and the supernatural are frequently referenced in romantic texts. And the invention of new forms, which the neoclassicists largely regard as a no-no, is in fact encouraged by the romanticists, right? So this is kind of where Abrams places the birth of expressive theory, right? Where the author is the most important factor. Now, the 19th century, in Britain, what we call the Victorian period, right? From the 1820s onward. This Queen Victoria lived a dumb long time. We have a decline in traditional religious belief, right? Institutional religion in Europe largely kind of remains relatively strong, but belief itself kind of begins to fray. You also have, in these kind of vast European empires, the rise of nationalism in a number of European colonies and in the European countries themselves, right? The sense of a people having a shared cultural heritage, a shared language, a shared history that unites them in a way that the political formation of empire does not, right? That makes them unique within the political formation of empire. The Industrial Revolution breaks up village life and frays a lot of traditional social bonds. People are less connected to a single place or to the land. And so, a number of European critics, the German Friedrich Schiller, the Englishman Matthew Arnold, and even an American critic, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in this period begin to view literature as a kind of social glue that can replace traditional religion and teach us to live well with other people. So, the Victorian critic regards art as having this kind of social purpose, literature as having this kind of social purpose, as a kind of substitute for religious dogma. And the last thing I want to talk about today is an antecedent to modern literary theory, is the aestheticism and decadence of the late 19th century. These are movements that develop in France in the middle of the 19th century, and then kind of spread outward first to the British Isles and then to the Americas. So aestheticism, as the critic Chris Baldick defines it, is the doctrine or disposition that regards beauty as an end in itself and attempts to preserve the arts for moral, didactic, or political purposes. So what we see here is the development of an objective literary and artistic theory, right? Where all that matters is the beauty of the work itself. And largely this was kind of developed as a kind of thumb in the eye to middle class values of practicality, of morality, right? As the moneyed middle class becomes dominance in Western Europe, and their values, which Matthew Arnold earlier in the century refers to as the values of the Philistine, right? Practicality, money making, respectability, become kind of annoying and irksome to artists. Now, related to aestheticism is the idea of decadence. Now, decadence as a theory is dependent on the writings of the French poet Charles Baudelaire. Balzac defines this as a state of decay shown in either the inferior literary quality or the looser moral standards of any period's work compared with the preceding period. So while aestheticists held up beauty as its own end or as its own goal, decadent artists deliberately celebrate decay, weirdness, exoticism, frank depictions of often left of center, kind of kinky out of the ordinary sexual behavior, drugs, evil, flowers, perfumes, Catholic rituals, celebration of down and out urban life. Now, there are two things that all these have in common, right? One is sensory pleasure, and two is the kind of fleeting nature of many of these experiences. So if you think about a flower or a fruit, right? When does a flower smell the sweetest? When does a fruit taste the sweetest, right? Right before it rots. And that's what a decadent artist is trying to catch, right? Is that last burst of sweetness before rot sets in. For a decadent, the artificial is a higher value than the natural, right? Baudelaire writes that he prefers the monsters of his own imagination to anything he finds in nature. And as I said, it tends to focus on fleeting pleasures and impermanent sensations. Another thing you'll often find in decadent work is what we call synesthesia, right? The kind of the union of or confusion of sensory impressions. So I would recommend, actually, if you want to get a sense of what this looks like, there's a poem by Baudelaire called Correspondences. I'm sure you can find a good translation fairly easily online. You can look at that for a good example of what I'm talking about here. So that kind of does it for our first introductory lecture. Remember to upload your little introductory videos to the forum, right? Thread is right there and easily visible, says introductions. I've posted some discussion questions as you read the formalist critical essays for next week, right? So I'm just going to post, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to post this PowerPoint to the Georgia View page so you have it for reference. And we will see you next week to talk about Russian formalism and the new critics.